Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning into this story. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I never expected so many things to go out of control in one night. I drive big rigs for a living, delivering goods across several states. My schedule often demands overnight hauls, with rest stops in lonely places where you're lucky to see another soul. You get used to the hum of the engine, the sweeping headlights on silent highways, and the metallic taste of coffee from roadside diners. But nothing prepared me for what would happen during this particular run. A run that started like any other and ended in something I still can't wrap my head around. I was hired to transport a container to a remote warehouse. The location was off the beaten path, a few miles from a small town and surrounded by farmland. My boss had told me the place was an old storage facility used by multiple suppliers. They needed a late-night drop-off to ensure the cargo was there by morning. It sounded simple enough. Arrive at the warehouse around midnight, unload the container, sign some paperwork, and head back. I set out around dusk. The highway stretched before me, a ribbon of dark asphalt under an ever-fading sky. My truck's headlights pierced the night, reflecting off occasional signs warning about deer crossings. The ride was unusually quiet, fewer cars than usual, and no chatter on the CB radio. Usually, the airwaves crackle with traffic updates or small talk from fellow truckers. That night, though, nothing but static. Somewhere between the interstate exit and the farmland roads, my phone vibrated with a sudden emergency alert. I'm used to weather warnings and flash flood notices, so I didn't think much of it at first. I glanced at the screen briefly. A message about a possible infectious outbreak in multiple regions. It advised caution, saying folks should limit travel and remain indoors if they could. The wording was vague. I couldn't figure out if it was just a severe flu or something more, but I could sense a certain urgency in the text. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, my phone lost signal. Normally, an alert like that would concern me, but I was in the middle of a remote area with no strong reception to dig deeper for details. My job was to deliver cargo, not get caught up in what might have been a glitchy alert. I figured if it were truly serious, local radio stations or my dispatch would say something. Close to midnight, I turned onto a narrow road leading to the warehouse. The pavement gave way to gravel, and my headlights revealed tall weeds growing along the shoulder. The facility itself sat behind a chain-link fence, which had a gate that was propped open. A single flickering lamp lit the loading dock, casting dancing shadows across the corrugated metal walls. I stopped in front of the gatehouse, expecting to see a guard. The little shack was empty, though the door stood ajar. A slight chill ran through me, but I brushed it off. Maybe the staff was inside waiting. I eased my truck through the gate and parked near the loading dock. The overhead light buzzed with a dull hum, and the night air seemed unnaturally still. I grabbed my clipboard and hopped down from the cab. My footsteps echoed as I approached a small door beside the main cargo entry. The building's interior lighting was dim, casting long shadows on the concrete floor. I remember feeling a sudden wave of unease, as though I had walked into a forgotten place. A few overhead bulbs flickered, revealing a cavernous space with dusty shelves and stacks of pallets. "Hello?" I called out, my voice reverberating. No response. I tried again, louder this time, but still nothing. There was a desk at the far end with a computer and a few chairs. Maybe the warehouse attendant had just stepped away. I let out a sigh, walked back to the truck, and prepared to unload. If no one was around, I'd make do on my own. I lowered the truck's rear gate, checked that the container was secure, then wheeled out the first pallet. The warehouse was unusually empty for a place that supposedly serviced multiple suppliers. Only a handful of boxes sat off to one side, near a forklift that looked like it hadn't been moved in a while. Metal racking lined the walls, but most of it was barren. As I parked the first pallet, I spotted something odd. A shoe. Just one. It lay on its side near the forklift, as if someone had stepped out of it mid-stride. A few feet away, I noticed faint scuff marks on the concrete, as though there had been a brief struggle. The sight made the hairs on my neck stand up. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a worker lost a shoe by accident or left it behind. But the strangest part was a lingering metallic scent in the air. Not exactly coppery, more like the dull tang of machinery that's overheated. I couldn't place it, and I decided I didn't want to linger on the thought. I pushed on, unloading each pallet carefully, hoping someone would show up with a clipboard and sign for the delivery. After hauling the last pallet inside, I decided to see if the lights in the office area still worked, or if there was a phone I could use to call my dispatcher. I walked deeper into the facility, my boots crunching on unseen debris. Each step made a hollow sound that echoed in the vast, dimly lit space. That's when I heard it. A crackle from what sounded like a portable radio. Following the noise, I found a small security booth near a side entrance. The booth's door was ajar, and inside a radio sat on a desk, volume turned low. Static hissed, broken up by faint words. I leaned in, adjusting the dial until the signal became clearer. At first, I heard a monotone, like a droning siren or beep, but then a voice cut through. This is an official announcement. All citizens are advised to remain indoors and avoid contact with unfamiliar individuals. Reports of unpredictable behavior are being verified. Do not attempt to approach those who appear disoriented or show signs of aggression. Authorities recommend seeking immediate shelter. My pulse quickened. This wasn't just a run-of-the-mill health warning. Something serious was going on. My phone had lost signal earlier, so I had no new updates. And here I was, out in the middle of nowhere at a warehouse that appeared abandoned. My hands began to tremble slightly, though I tried to steady my nerves. Maybe the warehouse staff had evacuated in a hurry, leaving me alone in this unnerving silence. As I turned to leave the security booth, I caught a faint silhouette in the doorway, just for a second. It looked like a shape, hunched over, then gone as soon as I blinked. My heart jumped, and I hurried out, trying to catch whoever it was. I saw nothing. The only movement came from the dust motes swirling in the stale air. I decided I'd be better off in my truck, maybe head back early or find a safe place to park until I could confirm what was happening. With adrenaline coursing through me, I sprinted across the open floor toward the loading dock door. But when I reached it, my stomach twisted. The overhead door I had pulled down earlier was now locked from the outside, and the smaller side door, where I'd first entered, was latched shut. I tried jiggling the handle, then pulling with all my might. Nothing. I pounded on it, calling out. There was no response. Not from a guard. Not from the phantom figure I thought I'd seen. The building swallowed my shouts, sending them back at me as echoes. Panic started to creep in. Why would anyone lock me inside? And if they weren't the ones who did it, who had? I jogged around the interior perimeter, checking for alternative exits. Most of the side doors were either heavily bolted or blocked by equipment. One door, likely a fire exit, had a push bar, but something heavy was barricading it from outside. It refused to budge. I caught myself wishing I had turned the truck around as soon as I noticed how empty the place was. But I had let my sense of professional duty override the warning in my gut. Now I was locked in a silent warehouse with no easy way out, as an ominous announcement played on a static-filled radio about an outbreak that was clearly more than just a routine crisis. Deciding that finding another person, even if it was the shape I glimpsed, was my best bet, I ventured to the far side of the warehouse. Tall racks formed narrow aisles, creating a shadowy maze. Rows of packing crates towered above me, their labels smeared by time and dust. Every so often I heard a subtle scuffle, like a shoe sliding on concrete. Each time I spun around to look, there was no one there. Then I saw a smear on the floor. It was dark, difficult to identify in the dim light. It led to a spot behind a stack of crates. Steeling myself, I rounded the corner. Tucked between crates was a jacket, crumpled as if someone had tossed it there in a hurry. It was ripped along one sleeve, with more of that strange metallic smell clinging to it. My stomach lurched as I imagined a desperate scuffle happening here, the jacket torn amid confusion or panic. I forced myself to move on. My flashlight beam trembled as I navigated deeper into the aisles. My mind conjured unsettling images. What if the person who wore that jacket was still here, hurt or disoriented? Or worse, what if something else was stalking me? Somewhere to my left, I heard a muffled rustling. I aimed my light in that direction, catching only shelves and more boxes. Taking a careful step, I whispered, "Hello? Is anyone there?" No reply. Eventually, I came across a narrow hallway. Flickering lights revealed a row of small offices with glass panes above wooden doors. Most were locked, but the last door on the left stood open. I peeked inside. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, revealing a cramped room. Filing cabinets lined one wall, and an old computer monitor rested on a desk. I stepped in and tried the light switch. To my surprise, the overhead bulb stabilized, giving me a moment of clarity. I could finally see in detail. The desk was cluttered with papers and a half-empty coffee cup. A photograph of a smiling family was pinned to the corkboard, probably the occupants' loved ones. The coffee had gone cold, a thin film on its surface. The entire scene looked like whoever had been here left in a rush. An official notice lay face up on the desk. My eyes skimmed through phrases like priority quarantine, do not interact and stay indoors. It was dated just a day ago. A highlight marker circled lines, indicating that the facility might be used as a holding area if the situation escalated. If that was true, where were the personnel? Where were the trucks of supplies? I rummaged through the desk drawers, hoping to find a key or a phone. Nothing. The phone on the desk was silent, no dial tone. Defeated, I sank into the chair, trying to collect my thoughts. That's when I noticed an odd clumping sound coming from beyond the hallway. It reminded me of someone dragging something across the floor, slow and laborious. My heart thudded in my chest. I stood up, careful not to make any noise. I turned off the flashlight, letting my eyes adjust to the dimly lit hall. The dragging sound grew louder. Something was moving outside. Then I saw it. A figure gliding across the hallway toward the office I occupied. Its movement was unsteady. The overhead light flickered, and for a moment I saw enough of the figure's face to realize something was very wrong. The skin looked pale, almost ashen, and the eyes didn't seem to focus. It carried a sort of stumbling gait, as if every step took tremendous effort. The figure stopped just outside the doorway, leaning against the wall. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed myself against the office's inner wall, out of direct sight, and forced myself to remain silent, despite the urge to call out or run. The figure's breathing sounded shallow, rasping, almost like a hiss. Then a soft moan filled the air. I can't fully explain it without sounding melodramatic, but it sent a chill through me like no other. It was neither entirely human, nor purely animal. Something in between, pained and restless. The moan echoed in the hallway. I don't know how long I stood there, heart pounding, as the figure lingered just a few steps away. Finally, it shuffled onward, dragging its feet into the next room across the hall. Once the sound faded, I mustered the courage to poke my head out. I saw no one, but the sense of dread remained, thick in the air. I needed to leave that place. The locked doors, the flickering lights, the missing people. None of it felt safe anymore. Even if my truck was stuck behind locked doors, maybe I could find a window or some other opening. Anything to get out. My next move was to search the perimeter walls for any means of escape. Perhaps a window in a break room, or a partially open vent, or even a rooftop exit. I remembered seeing a set of metal stairs leading to a second-floor office section. If the main exits were blocked, maybe an upper level had a ladder or a fire escape. As I crept back through the aisles, I heard a faint voice. It was different from the moan I'd heard earlier, closer to a real human voice. My pulse raced with hope. I followed the sound across the warehouse floor, weaving around stacked pallets and equipment. The voice seemed to come from somewhere above me. I found the metal staircase I'd recalled. It creaked loudly under my weight. Each step echoed, making my presence known. Halfway up, I paused to listen. Sure enough, the voice was clearer. It sounded like a person murmuring something, maybe trying to reach out for help. At the top of the stairs was a walkway that led to a door marked Supervisor's Office. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see the faint glow of a flickering light inside. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. Was this another trap, or an actual survivor? Inside the office, I found a small lamp set on the floor. Its bulb flickered weakly, revealing a cramped space full of boxes and scattered paperwork. Huddled in the corner was a person, maybe in their 30s, wearing jeans and a torn polo shirt. They looked up at me with wide, fearful eyes. A bandana was wrapped around one forearm, stained with something dark. When they saw I was just a truck driver, they let out a sigh of relief, though it sounded strained. "Thank goodness," they whispered, voice weak. I was starting to think nobody else was here. I introduced myself gently, trying not to startle them. They mentioned they were a warehouse clerk, part of a skeleton crew assigned to oversee a batch of deliveries. When the emergency alert came through, the rest of the staff left in a hurry. The clerk stayed behind to finish some last-minute paperwork, figuring it was a false alarm, until they realized something very real was going on. The facility was placed on lockdown, some sort of official directive to keep the building sealed. The clerk tried to leave, but found the gates locked and the roads barricaded. In the confusion, they encountered a co-worker who seemed to be in a disoriented state, with no recognition in their eyes. When the co-worker became hostile, the clerk fled upstairs, injuring their arm in the scramble. They glanced at their bandana-wrapped forearm. "I'm worried about what this means," they said, voice trembling. "It's not a deep wound, but I've been feeling a bit odd." I didn't know what to say, so I stayed calm and assured them I'd help. "We need to find an exit," I said. "It's not safe to stay here." The clerk nodded, wincing slightly as they stood up. I noticed they were shaky on their feet. "I'm okay," they insisted. "Just need some air." Together, we rummaged through the supervisor's desk for keys or codes. We found a ring of keys in a top drawer labeled with short designations, likely for different sections of the warehouse. One key had a red tag that read EXT, which we both hoped meant exit. We carefully made our way back down the metal stairs. The clerk leaned on me for support, each step sending a metallic clang through the cavernous space. When we reached the bottom, we paused, listening for any sign of that stumbling figure or others like it. Silence. Following the building's perimeter, we tested doors, shining the flashlight on the key ring to read labels. Most were for internal storage rooms. We found one labeled food store, an empty supply room with only a vending machine and some bottled water. We grabbed a couple of bottles for the road, just in case. Eventually, we reached a solid metal door with a faded sign reading emergency exit. It had a keyhole that matched our red-tagged key. I felt a surge of hope as I slid the key in and turned. With a heavy click, the door unlocked. But when we pushed on it, the door barely gave. Something on the other side was blocking it, maybe debris or a vehicle. The clerk and I pushed with all our might, gaining a fraction of an inch. We could feel the door shift against an obstacle. There was a narrow gap, enough to let in a chilly breeze. For a moment, I glimpsed the outside, the dark silhouette of parked trailers and the glow of a single floodlight in the distance. Freedom was just on the other side, but we couldn't squeeze through the small opening. "Maybe we can use a crowbar or something," I suggested. The clerk nodded, though their breathing had grown heavier, and I noticed beads of sweat forming on their forehead. Their eyes occasionally seemed distant, unfocused. I reminded myself they might be in shock or fighting an infection, and we needed to move fast. We backtracked, keeping an eye out for anything we could use to clear the door. A forklift or a pallet jack could help move whatever was blocking it from the outside, but that would mean locating a loading bay door that actually opened. Worse, we'd have to navigate the entire warehouse again, possibly running into those wandering individuals. I feared they might not be the only ones. The clerk was beginning to mutter under their breath, occasionally shaking their head as if trying to stay alert. We found a crowbar in a tool cabinet near a workbench, and I suggested we go back to the door, try to pry it open. On our way, a loud screech echoed through the rafters, making us freeze. It sounded like metal scraping against metal, but somehow more eerie. We hurried past rows of crates, heading for the emergency exit. Then we saw something that stopped us in our tracks. Across the wide aisle, we spotted a group of 3 figures. They stood close together, their forms swaying slightly. They resembled the figure I'd seen in the hallway, pale and unfocused, clothes disheveled. One of them turned its head in our direction, and even from a distance, I could see an unsettling emptiness in its gaze. Without a word, I tugged the clerk's arm, and we quietly skirted behind a row of shelving. I heard one of the figures emit a low moan, echoed by the others. My heart pounded as we crept along the shadows, clinging to the sides of crates, mindful of every step so as not to kick anything that could make noise. When we finally reached the emergency exit again, we pressed our ears to the door. Everything outside seemed still. I forced the crowbar into the gap, pushing with all my might. The door groaned. The crack widened enough for us to see that a large garbage bin had rolled against the exit, probably carried by the wind or placed there by someone. We could see the moonlit parking lot, just waiting for us to step out. But the bin was wedged tightly. I put all my strength into levering it aside, each effort scraping metal on concrete. The clerk tried to help, but their strength was waning. I saw them pressing a hand to their temple as if dizzy. As we struggled with the crowbar, a single sharp noise pierced the silence from behind us. A clank, maybe a piece of debris kicked over by a foot. I turned to see one of those pale figures creeping closer. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and it lifted an arm toward us, almost in slow motion. Without thinking, I reached for the clerk's hand. "Help me push," I said, my voice cracking under the strain. We heaved on the crowbar. With a loud scrape, the bin shifted enough for me to wedge a shoulder through the gap. The infected figure was now just a few yards away, joined by a second. Their raspy moans made my heart race. I yelled, "Go!" The clerk slipped through first, stumbling onto the asphalt outside. I forced the crowbar again, opening the gap enough for me to squeeze out. The moment I was outside, I yanked the crowbar free, causing the bin to roll back and slam against the door. It clanged shut, leaving us panting in the cool night air. Outside, the warehouse lot was eerily empty. Rows of parked trailers stood like silent sentinels, illuminated by a distant floodlight that cast long shadows. My own rig was inside, but I couldn't get to it from out here, not unless I found a way to open the main cargo doors, and the gate at the entrance might also be locked. The clerk slumped against the side of the building, breathing heavily. "I don't feel so good," they muttered. Their eyes were glazed, sweat trickling down their brow. I scanned the lot, spotting an office trailer at the far end. Maybe that was where the gate control or some keys could be found. "Wait here," I said, though I knew leaving them alone was risky. Still, they looked like they needed a moment to rest. "I'll check that office, see if we can open the gate." They gave a faint nod, sliding down to sit on the concrete. With the crowbar in hand, I walked briskly toward the floodlit trailer. The silence of the night made my ears ring, every footstep echoing in my head. When I reached the door, I found it locked, but a swift pry with the crowbar broke it open. The trailer's interior smelled stale, like old coffee and moth-eaten upholstery. I flipped a light switch. No response. No power, it seemed. Rummaging around, I discovered dusty binders, a mess of receipts, and a small key box mounted on the wall. By some luck, it was unlocked. Inside were numerous keys, each labelled with a strip of masking tape. Dock 1, Dock 2, Back Gate, Maintenance. I grabbed all of them, stuffing them in my pocket. I also found a flashlight that looked brand new, along with 2 extra batteries. I felt a flicker of hope. When I stepped back outside, I immediately sensed something was off. The clerk wasn't sitting by the warehouse wall anymore. In the distance, near a line of trailers, I thought I saw a silhouette moving slowly. My instinct told me it might be them.
I hurried over, shining the flashlight. It was the clerk, but hunched forward, as if struggling to stay balanced. Their breathing was ragged, and they seemed disoriented. As I approached, I noticed their eyes were partially unfocused, and they murmured incoherent words under their breath.
"Hey," I said softly. "We're almost out of here. I found a key for the gate, maybe." They stared at me, blinking hard as if trying to remember who I was. "I don't know what's happening," they whispered. "My head feels like it's on fire. My arm burns." Looking closer, I saw the bandana was now dark and damp. Whatever wound they had must have been more serious than they let on. My stomach dropped. I'd heard the radio warnings about unusual behavior and aggression. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the clerk's condition was alarming. "I'll help you," I said. "Let's just get you somewhere safe. We can find medical supplies or call for help." They nodded weakly, leaning on me as we walked. We headed along the perimeter fence, searching for the main entrance gate. The night sky was cloudy and a soft wind rustled through the weeds. Eventually we reached the front of the property. A tall sliding gate blocked the exit, chain-locked and reinforced with a steel bar. I jangled the keys I had taken from the office trailer. One of them might fit the lock. I knelt by the chain, trying key after key. Meanwhile, the clerk wavered on their feet, pressing a hand to their forehead. After the third attempt, one of the keys turned. The lock clicked open, and the chain loosened. Relief washed over me. Maybe we could drive one of the smaller trucks out, or even just walk down the road, find help in the nearest town. But as I pulled the steel bar away, a faint chorus of moans echoed from behind us. I turned to see figures at the far edge of the parking lot, silhouettes in the dim floodlight. More than just one or two, at least 4 or 5. They moved slowly, but their presence made my heart hammer. I grabbed the clerk by the shoulder, guiding them toward the open gate. We stumbled out onto the rural road. The air felt cooler, and the night sky seemed darker, as if offering no comfort. A few yards away, I saw a battered pickup truck parked on the shoulder. It might have belonged to someone who fled. If it had keys, maybe we could get it started. The clerk, however, could barely walk now. They collapsed onto their knees, panting heavily. "I'm sorry," they mumbled. I can't keep going." I was about to reply when the sound of static cut through the silence, coming from a handheld radio clipped to the clerk's belt. A new emergency broadcast crackled. "Attention, do not attempt to travel on major highways. Enforced zones are in effect. Repeat, do not travel on major highways without authorization. Report any abnormal behavior to authorities. Remain calm and follow instructions from official channels." The clerk's eyes glazed over, and they clutched their arm. I realized with dread that they might not make it much further without medical attention. But there was no hospital or urgent care facility nearby, just farmland and closed businesses. I had to make a choice. Try to help the clerk to the pickup, and risk being overtaken by the growing number of silhouettes, or leave them there to check if the truck worked. I felt a twist of guilt, but survival instincts told me to see if the pickup was functional. If it was, I could drive right up, load them in, and escape. "I'll be right back," I told the clerk, gently resting them against the fence. They nodded, eyes half closed, as if holding onto consciousness by a thread. I sprinted to the pickup. The driver's side door was unlocked, and the interior was dark. I fumbled around, finding the overhead light. There were scattered papers and an empty backpack on the passenger seat. The key was still in the ignition. I twisted it. Nothing. I tried again, pumping the gas pedal. The engine coughed and sputtered, but refused to start. Desperation flooded me as I turned the key again and again. Eventually, it roared to life with a groan, the engine rattling like it hadn't been maintained in ages. I whooped quietly, hardly believing my luck. The fuel gauge hovered near a quarter tank. Not great, but maybe enough to reach a safer location. I threw it into gear and steered toward the warehouse gate. Headlights illuminated the fence line, revealing the clerk still slumped where I left them. Relief and fear mingled as I realized we were out in the open, and those figures could approach at any second. I pulled up beside the clerk, jumped out, and tried to help them into the passenger seat. As soon as I touched their shoulder, they jerked awake. Their eyes were wide, but somehow not fully present. They tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. Then, to my horror, they suddenly twisted and lashed out, fingers clutching at my jacket. Their grip was like iron, unexpected from someone who had seemed so weak moments ago. "Hey, stop," I hissed, struggling to free myself. The clerk's face was contorted in some mixture of confusion and something darker. I managed to break their grip and eased them into the seat as gently as I could. "I'm sorry," they mumbled, as if momentarily lucid again. "I don't know what's happening to me." I strapped them in, my hands shaking. My mind raced with the knowledge that the clerk might be succumbing to the same condition afflicting those pale figures. But they were still somewhat themselves, still speaking. Maybe there was a chance. I hopped back into the driver's seat, pressed the gas, and rumbled onto the road. The headlights caught a line of scattered vehicles ahead, likely abandoned in haste. I dodged a few, weaving to avoid wrecked cars. The clerk slumped against the window, breathing raggedly. We drove through the darkness, no streetlights in sight. An eerie hush seemed to blanket the entire region, broken only by the truck's engine and the wind against the windows. Each time I glanced at the clerk, they looked closer to fading out, their lips parted in a silent whisper. After some time, 10 minutes, maybe 20, we approached what appeared to be a crossroads. Road signs indicated a nearby town. Dim lights flickered in the distance, possibly from a few houses or a small gas station. My plan was to head there, see if I could find medical supplies or at least somewhere to shelter. That's when the clerk stirred, letting out a small groan. I slowed the truck, concerned they might need immediate attention. Their eyes opened, and for a fleeting instant they seemed calm. "Thank you," they managed to say. I'm sorry about before, I didn't mean to lash out." I gave a reassuring nod, though worry gnawed at me. "We'll get help," I said softly, trying to sound confident. "We just need to find a safe spot with other people. Let them know what's going on." They nodded, but as I watched, their gaze drifted to a point beyond the windshield, unfocused. A few moments later, they slipped into a stupor again, eyes half-lidded. We kept driving until the silhouette of a small gas station emerged on the right side of the road. It looked deserted, but the canopy lights over the pumps were still on. I parked near the entrance, scanning for movement. No cars, no signs of life. The windows of the mini-mart were dark, possibly no power inside. I gently shook the clerk's shoulder. "We're here," I said. "Stay put. I'll be right back." They mumbled something incoherent, and I debated whether to bring them inside or leave them in the truck. I decided it was safer for them, and for me, to keep them in the passenger seat, locked in, until I could check the station. If anything lurked inside, I didn't want them exposed. The front door was locked, but a quick pry with the crowbar forced it open. The store was dimly lit by the emergency lights near the coolers. Shelves stood in neat rows, half-stocked. A faint smell of cleaning solution lingered in the air. At least it didn't look ransacked. I moved through the aisles, grabbing a first aid kit, water bottles, and a few packaged snacks. When I reached the counter, I found a small TV mounted on the wall. It was off, so I flicked the power button. Static. No signal. Next to it was an old radio. I turned the dial, searching for any station. Finally, a crackle of a broadcast. Situation continues to evolve. Officials recommend avoiding contact with unfamiliar individuals showing signs of confusion or lack of awareness. If you witness suspicious gatherings or hear distressing sounds, maintain distance. Do not attempt to approach or provide assistance without protective equipment. This transmission will repeat. The message cut out. I twisted the dial but only got static. My spirits sank. We had no contact with the outside world other than sporadic emergency bulletins. No sign of a rescue team or a safe zone. Just repeated warnings to stay away from the afflicted. Arms full of supplies, I headed back to the truck. The parking lot was silent. Inside the cab, the clerk was leaning against the window, eyes closed. At first, I thought they were sleeping, but as I opened the driver's side door, they stirred. "Here," I said, setting down the water and first aid kit. "Let me see your arm." They allowed me to unwrap the bandana. The wound looked worse, with angry discoloration. I dabbed it with antiseptic from the kit, though I wasn't sure it would help. The clerk winced, letting out a faint cry. Before I could rewrap it, they seized my wrist. "Something's wrong. Inside me," they whispered, eyes flickering with anxiety. "Promise me, you won't let me hurt anyone." My throat felt tight. I didn't know what to say. Nodding, I gently wrapped a fresh bandage over the wound. "We'll keep going," I managed. "We'll find help." I wanted to believe that. I wanted to cling to the idea that there was an outpost or clinic or police station that remained functional. But deep down, I suspected this event had escalated beyond local authorities' control. Starting the pickup again, we drove further down the lonely road. Farmland stretched on either side, dark fields with only the moon's glow. Occasionally, we passed abandoned vehicles or homes with lights off, no sign of people. A hush hung over everything, as if the world had gone into hiding. The clerk drifted in and out of coherence. At times, they tried to speak about their life, bits of memory or random thoughts. Other times, they just stared ahead, silent and distant. We turned onto another road leading toward what the sign said was a larger town. But as we neared the outskirts, a barrier came into view, makeshift barricades, orange cones, and signs reading "restricted area." I slowed the truck, scanning for a path around. The barricade looked official, but no one was manning it. It was just left there. Beyond it, the road stretched into darkness, illuminated only by sporadic streetlights. I considered driving around the barricade, but the ditches and fields on either side looked too risky for the pickup. We might get stuck. On the other hand, going back meant returning to the warehouse or trying another route, uncertain if we'd find the same obstacles. As we sat there, engine idling, the clerk stirred again, gesturing weakly at something in the distance. When I followed their gaze, I noticed faint beams of headlights moving across a nearby road, cutting through the dark. It could be an emergency vehicle or another traveler. Desperate, I decided to find a way to intercept that road. I reversed the pickup, circling around a narrow side street. We navigated through a series of back roads, crossing intersections where traffic lights blinked yellow, the towns seemingly deserted. Then, we saw it. A set of headlights passing slowly at the end of a cross street. I beeped the horn, a quick, cautious tap. The approaching vehicle, a large SUV with tinted windows, slowed. My heart lifted. Maybe we had found fellow survivors or officials who could guide us to safety. But as soon as I pulled closer, the SUV's driver apparently panicked and accelerated, veering around our pickup. They zoomed off into the distance, leaving us alone again on the vacant street. I sighed, banging my fist lightly on the steering wheel. The clerk whispered something unintelligible, eyes fluttering. With options dwindling, I decided to pull into a small motel lot on the edge of town. The neon sign flickered, half the letters burnt out. The front office windows were dark, and the parking lot was empty except for a couple of cars that looked like they'd been sitting there for days. I parked near the front entrance, glancing at the clerk. They were barely conscious. Their breathing was shallow and they trembled, as if fighting a fever. I realized I needed to find a place for them to rest, maybe a clean bed, even if it was just for a short while. The front door of the motel was locked, but a swift push with my shoulder forced it open. Inside, the lobby smelled stale. A reception desk stood near the entrance and a row of key hooks hung behind it. Most keys were still there, probably indicating rooms were vacant. I helped the clerk inside, guiding them toward a worn-out couch in the corner of the lobby. I checked behind the counter for anything that could help. Blankets, medical supplies, food. I found a small stash of water bottles and some snack bars in a drawer. The clerk's skin was clammy. I draped a threadbare blanket over them. "Stay here,"
I murmured, though I doubted they could fully comprehend. Their eyes flickered open, then closed.
I returned to the front entrance to prop a chair against the door, just in case. Outside, the night stretched on, endless and unsettling. I could barely see any signs of normal life. Occasional emergency alerts still chimed faintly on the clerk's radio, warnings repeating in an endless loop about the outbreak. I realized that we were stranded in a town that might already be abandoned or under some form of lockdown. Just two people against an unknown threat growing by the hour. Should I drive on, searching for a hospital? Would I even find one functioning in all this chaos? And what about the clerk? Could I really leave them in the lobby, in their condition, to go off searching on foot? The fear of encountering more of those pale individuals haunted my thoughts. I stood there, heart pounding, gazing through the motel's cracked glass doors at the deserted road beyond. The sense of isolation bore down on me like a physical weight. Despite the silent streets, I knew that beyond the dim glow of the streetlights, more figures might be roaming, drawn by the slightest noise or movement. I wondered if I should hunker down, barricade the doors, and wait for help, or if such help would ever come. My truck was still locked in that warehouse, and this borrowed pickup was on its last legs. We had limited supplies, limited time. The clerk's fate hung by a thread, and I couldn't just abandon them. Yet, in the back of my mind, I feared the worst. That the outbreak was not a localized incident, but something widespread. That even if I did find a way out of town, I might just run into more barricades, more empty roads, and more wandering silhouettes. Perhaps the entire region was compromised. For a moment, I closed my eyes, letting the faint hum of the motel's neon sign fill my ears. My breath trembled, and I forced myself to remain calm. A swirl of questions buzzed in my head. Should I gather what little we had and keep driving? Should I set up a safe spot in the motel and hope the worst passes? Would morning light bring clarity, or more chaos? With no real answers, I took a deep breath and turned to check on the clerk. The blanket rose and fell with their shallow breathing. They were still alive, at least for the moment. If I was going to act, it had to be soon. Quietly, I lit a small lamp on the reception desk, letting its glow reveal the dusty corners of the lobby. My eyes drifted to the clerk, then out the glass doors into the endless darkness. That was when I noticed it, a faint shape moving at the far end of the street, illuminated by a flickering lamppost. It stood still for a moment, then took a few steps toward the motel. Another shadow appeared beside it. My heart pounded as I clicked off the lamp, plunging the lobby back into semi-darkness, hoping they hadn't seen the glow. For now, we remained inside, hidden in the gloom. But in that moment, I realized something chilling. We weren't really hidden, not in any permanent way. The windows, the thin doors, even the fragile walls, they offered little in the face of this unknown threat. As I stood there, uncertain and afraid, I couldn't shake the feeling that our time was limited, that the outbreak was spreading, and that the deserted roads and locked gates were only the beginning. My next choice would likely determine both my fate and the clerk's. And yet, I had no idea what choice to make. Outside, the silhouettes drew closer, quiet and deliberate. Inside, a single lamp waited to be turned on again, revealing the fragile scene of a weary truck driver and a clerk who might be slipping beyond the point of no return. All around us, the night deepened, providing no answers, only questions in the face of a silent spreading crisis. And so we waited, caught between fear and hope, in a place where even the faintest hint of dawn seemed far away. Thank you for listening. If this story sent shivers down your spine, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps this channel alive. Until next time, stay vigilant and remember, curiosity can be quite the companion, and sometimes a curse.